Welcome to the Nomad Futurist Podcast, where ideas shape the future and visionaries redefine what's possible. Join us as we dive deep into the evolution of technology, society, and human potential, spotlighting the voices driving change and reimagining our world. Connect with us and join us at media.nomadfuturist.org. The future is a story we write together. Let's kick it off. Here are your hosts, Phil and Nabeel. Hello. Welcome to Nomad Futurist. This is your co-host, Nabeel Mahmood, calling in from Waikoloa, Hawaii.
This is your co-host, Phillip Koblence from Montclair, New Jersey.
Hey, I'm Snehar. I'm calling in from Nairobi in Kenya.
Brilliant. Well, now, officially, Phil, we are on the sixth continent.
Is this our first one from Africa? I thought we checked off Africa. We need Antarctica. We're done.
Exactly. Well, the Africa was from America, unfortunately. But we did, that was a starting point. Snehar, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Would you mind introducing at a high level, what do you do?
Sure. So I'm based in Kenya. As you probably know, Kenya is on the equator, and actually time zone wise, we're almost the center of the world. So we think in Kenya, we're the center of the universe.
There's a lot more in common with Kenyans and New Yorkers than you would have previously thought.
I'm very privileged to work at the cutting edge of tech, both in infrastructure and on the talent development side. That's really my passion. I'll take you through my journey, kind of came back full circle. I was born in Kenya. I come from a small town in the Rift Valley called Eldoret. It's very, very high altitude, and that's where the elite runners come from. I've got the honor of being able to train with some of those. When I was young, my family migrated to the UK. So I completed my studies in the UK. I became an electrical engineer from Imperial College in London. But I always had an ambition to work in business. So straight after qualifying, I turned into finance. I joined PwC, where I qualified as a chartered accountant. But during my 3 years doing audit at PwC, my biggest client was Orange Telco. Once I qualified with PwC, I found myself a job at Orange. It was quite exciting. This was back in 98, almost 27 years ago, when the whole prepaid concept of mobile was just starting up. And actually, Orange was the inventor of that. I worked in UK, Europe, in sort of finance strategy roles at Orange for around 10 years. And then it's about being at the right place at the right time. So Orange made a foray into East Africa. They bought the incumbent telco here called Telecom Kenya. I got the opportunity to come back to Africa. This is around 16 years ago as the CFO for Telecom Kenya. And I've been here since and had the experience in different sectors in tech in this part of the world.
What's unique is you hear a lot in our industry about people that take other tracks and then fall into our industry. You went on the engineering track. You graduated with an electrical engineering degree and then decided to move to the finance track and then came back, kind of gravitated. And I always considered it a superpower to have that ability to understand both worlds. But what was the driver for the electrical engineering degree in the first place? Were there engineers in your family? Was that the initial driver? And then you decided you wanted business? How did that come about?
No, my family is very much from the business background. My father has been a serial entrepreneur. I always had an interest in science and tech. And the beauty about studying in the UK and doing chartered accountancy in the UK, it's encouraged not to do a sort of finance-related undergraduate degree. So I did something that I had an interest in, but knowing very well that I wanted to come back into finance. And then now, again, happy to be working in a place where I'm using both fields.
So when you were pursuing the electrical engineering, did you, besides being in finance, was there any other pathway that you were looking at?
No, I've had my career quite well planned out. So no, I knew that just get the qualification. And it was a time when, this was just before the internet bubble burst. So there was a huge demand for engineers to work in the finance industry.
So did you always, from the perspective of knowing you wanted to go into business and finance, did you always recognize that you would gravitate back towards an engineering element of finance? Presumably, when you started with PwC, it wasn't that obvious that what trajectory the internet would take. And
Sure.
so did you always have that kind of thought that you would apply the kind of engineering element to your finance pursuits?
No, I think I was quite open then, but luck played a part. And actually, funny enough, orange is my favorite color.
Me too. My kids would certainly agree.
So orange happened kind of by accident, and I was very lucky to be there as part of the initial, I think I was employee number 102 or something like that. So we are very early days. And actually, I was with Orange for a couple of years. And again, this was right before the internet bubble burst. At that time, there was then a big demand of young talent who, having worked in the sort of tech industry with finance background, to actually go into banking. So I got poached by HSBC to become a telco analyst. So joined HSBC a few months straight after I joined. Actually, the internet bubble burst.
So you were the cause of it. Now we know. Now we know the cause of the
Right.
the man that burst the bubble. I think we got our title.
I was covering companies like Nortel, Marconi. They were quite cutting edge in those days, doing the switching equipment. Since the bubble burst, these big giants, they actually went bust, but rode the wave down. So I lasted 4 years at HSBC. And right at the end of the fourth year, I actually got made redundant. But I'd always kept my links, my previous colleagues. So I actually found myself back in a job at Orange being the lucky one. And thanks to Orange, I came back to Africa, and I was with them for 5 years. So worked in finance, but then after a couple of years, I actually got into innovation. And I'm not sure if the listeners are aware of this, but Kenya is the birthplace of mobile money. Mobile money was born in Kenya. There's a very successful product called Pesa, which is part of the Vodafone group. And even today, Pesa does more transactions than, say, Western Union does globally. I would say more than 80% of Kenya's GDP runs on the mobile phone. So I was quite lucky to launch a competitor product called Orange Money then, which we partnered with the biggest bank in the region here called Equity Bank. And this was the days pre the smartphones. So in those days, so this is back in 2010, I actually got banking functionality burnt onto a SIM card. So it was quite ahead of its time. You could transact, you could pay utility bills using your bog standard Nokia phone.
Now people take for granted that you can't even go to the coffee shop in my town and pay with cash. They don't accept it, right? So now nobody even brings a wallet anymore. Everything is done through the phone. So the idea that you had that idea before it was that functionality was built in is incredible.
So that's what got me into innovation. And having spent 5 years with Orange in Kenya, that was then the end of my corporate career. So then I got into the world of startups. So my data center currently, that's my fourth startup. My first one was actually in the infrastructure space, where I was a CFO for a telecom towers company called Eaton Towers, where we bought portfolios of telecom towers on sale and leaseback deals with the intent of basically being more cost-effective, economical to do infrastructure sharing. So we grew that portfolio to more than 6,000 towers in 5 countries. And then in 2018, we sold to the largest tower company globally called American Tower. So that's when I exited. So that was my first sort of scale up to exit. And then I've done my second startup was in renewable energy field. And this was providing small home solar systems for rural homes. So in Africa, it's quite ironic that our penetration rate of phone ownership is probably more than double than the electricity penetration. So we take some of these things for granted. So the grid cannot reach everywhere in our part of the world of more than 1.3 billion population. But thanks to technology and advances in renewable energy, rural homes can have access to basic lighting for cooking, for their kids to study, for charging mobile phones, listening to radio, etc. So we had this product which actually came out of, it was a spin-off from the University of Cambridge in the UK. And this product comes with a 50-watt solar panel with a lithium-ion battery, 4 LED lights, phone charger, a rechargeable radio, torch. And so this company was called Azuri Technologies. And we were the first in the world to introduce solar-powered television with satellite. So I grew that portfolio to having powered about 300,000 households in 4 countries in Africa. We got investment from one of the largest conglomerates from Japan called Marubeni. What's really gets me out of bed every day is not only growing businesses, but also the impact that I get to make in this part of the world.
I think people take for granted the concept of an emerging market because it just becomes a talking point. And there's just, if you think about like the cell phone penetration in Africa and how quickly, because there wasn't the kind of significant infrastructure that we had in the US or you had in the UK or throughout Europe, you were able to kind of leapfrog ahead in terms of cell phone penetration. And as a consequence of not having a lot of that infrastructure, we have this term in the computer world, technical debt. You didn't have a lot of this technical debt to be burdened by. So it seems like even with the renewable, you're kind of leapfrogging what the future should look like, which is not being beholden to wires and cables, but having solar, essentially off the grid homes being able to self-generate with renewables. And I've always loved the concept of problem solving as what we all do for a living, and looking at a community, a region, a population, and trying to figure out unique ways of solving an issue that are actually achievable. And putting a solar panel on a roof in an area that gets an abundance of sunlight makes all the sense in the world.
100%.
How did that return to Kenya from the UK and the ability to make an impact? Was that always part of the plan? Is that something your family supported, having moved you from Kenya to the UK?
It's not something I dreamt of because my family is in the UK. But coming back here, the family saw the opportunity for growth and making a difference. And here we are. So I've been very blessed we got 2 daughters. So now they're adults and at university, but we moved here when they were little kids. So we've been able to bring them up the way my wife and I grew up. So yeah, it's been great overall. But just coming back, Phil, to some of the leapfrogging. So, for example, these solar systems that we deployed, this was like 8 years ago. AI has become a big thing now, but actually we had AI and machine learning built into our systems back then. So how it works with solar is that if it's a cloudy day, then there's less charge to the battery, which means then the runtime is of your lights or a television is quite low. But we built in a technology where, depending on the level of sunlight, the brightness of the lights or the brightness of the TV adjusts automatically.
Draws less power.
Less power. We were able to guarantee exactly, say, 8 hours of runtime for the lights or the television. We already started deploying those kind of technologies.
It's kind of interesting. You just made 2 amazing points. One, M-Pesa versus PayPal. Everybody in the world knows PayPal, and PayPal had a massive cash out. I wish you actually had a massive cash out. You would have been the next Elon Musk, again, so like South African background there. And then AI, right? I mean, there's this hype, potentially probably even acceptance that we've seen over the last couple of years that digital infrastructure, data infrastructure have normalized. But AI existed 8, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So it's not necessarily anything new. Where do you see the potential gap or lack of understanding that these technologies exist, but we just not have been able to mass market or streamline in the existing processes? And also, why not Africa first, right? I mean, M-Pesa, like you said, 80% of their GDP relies on M-Pesa. So why haven't we been willing in primary markets like America and the UK or others to learn from them?
Yeah, so Nabeel, I mean, AI is still in its early stages. So we've not missed the boat yet. And so the example I gave was something that actually AI was working the way it did, or some machine learning offline. And to use, say, AI in its sort of current way, how it's being deployed, say, all these LLMs and ChatGPT, etc., the first thing we need to do is to make sure that we move our IT system infrastructure to the cloud. And in fact, again, that journey for Africa is still at very early stage. And that's why people like us exist, to help enterprises and customers make that transition. But I think the way things are moving so fast, we have an opportunity to, again, leapfrog, because we don't necessarily need to go to the, say, traditional cloud deployments. We can move straight to, for example, so rather than having just a sovereign cloud, we move to a sovereign AI kind of deployments. So the data center that we currently run, which is the largest in East and Central Africa, we've taken a leap of faith. We've taken the upfront risk to actually build big the traditional data centers here, they're sort of enterprise grade. So for example, they might be serving rack densities of probably 3 to 5 kilowatts per rack. What we've built and are actually now starting to deploy the servers behind that, we can do as much as 50 kilowatts per rack. So I think there's opportunity for us to not really play catch up, but to fast track and then leapfrog in that sense.
Brilliant. I mean, so do you think that Kenya market is actually ready for that 50 kilowatts rack density?
So if we look at Africa as a whole, and I think this statistic has been mentioned quite regularly in different sort of data center gatherings, so Africa makes up 18% of the global population, but we're probably 0.8% of the data center deployments globally. So there's a huge gap. You can't look at Africa as one because we have 54 countries, so out of which South Africa is the most advanced, and many people don't even see South Africa as Africa. So in South Africa, there is probably about 400 megawatts plus of data center deployment. Then the next two frontier markets are in West Africa. You've got Nigeria, which is a huge population. There are more than 200 million population, but Nigeria has had its own challenges. Kenya is a hub of East Africa. We have about 50 million population, but within East Africa, we have access to like 300 million plus population. The total like data center deployment in Kenya, for example, including us, we just went live last year. We're like 10 megawatts. So the gap between, say, Kenya and South Africa is massive. On the other hand, we have a stable government. We have very progressive regulation and policies. I mean, regulation is one of the reasons why M-Pesa is such a success, where Nigeria, it was a big failure because the central bank was too stringent in the regulation, whereas in Kenya, they were quite pragmatic. That's why the deployment of renewable energy is also quite successful because the government gave very good subsidies on taxes, etc. And we're seeing the same now happening when it comes to data sharing and infrastructure deployments. So in Kenya, Kenya is of course popular for our wildlife and our agriculture and tourism, but not many people know this, but we are the sixth largest producer of geothermal energy after Scandinavia and Iceland. So in the Rift Valley, we have like more than 30 gigawatts of unused geothermal capacity. So that's why we were now seeing the hyperscalers who've already put the regions in South Africa. Next, they're coming to our market. Microsoft announced $1 billion investment last year to not only bring a regional zone, but to the AI processing, not only for our market, but for global needs. And then we'll talk about this, my other passion, which is talent. And we have a great education system here. English is the national language. The government has made, so for example, primary education to be free. That's quite unique for this part of the world. And we're seeing quite good, capable, smart talent come out. So all those ingredients are setting us up for some exciting developments in the future.
As a New Yorker, I'm starting to buy into the fact that Kenya is the center of the world. I mean, it's pretty damn good.
Phil's ready to pack and move.
There's something else, Nabeel, you mentioned about PayPal. So the ex-CEO of PayPal and then HP, Meg Whitman, who's a very successful business person out of the US. So the last 4 years, she's been the US ambassador in Kenya. So she's the one who has really been instrumental in putting our market on the world map. And Kenya and Nairobi especially is nicknamed the Silicon Savannah. So we have a lot of action happening here.
It's amazing to see, like, with all of the ingredients in place, how you really can, given the emerging nature of the market, kind of leapfrog the rest of the world that is trapped in, like we talked about earlier, the technical debt element of it, and certainly the bureaucratic kind of red tape associated with deploying these things. When you have society with a stake in the outcome and a government that's willing to support it, you're firing on all cylinders. Do you find that, are there any connectivity limitations? I mean, one of the areas that is difficult to replicate from a maturity standpoint of even in various US markets, you have the kind of tier one cities of New York and Chicago and Los Angeles and Seattle, and of course, Loudoun County, Northern Virginia, is the inertia of connectivity that has taken place and been built up over time. Is that potentially a limiting factor, or is that something that you guys have taken into account in how the kind of Kenyan market has evolved?
So, Phil, I've seen that whole connectivity landscape evolve over the last 15 years or so. So when I came to Kenya, the only way for Kenya to access the internet to the rest of the world was through satellite, through the VSATs.
The towers that you were leasing.
Yeah, exactly. But soon after, actually, the first submarine cables landed. So in the Indian Ocean coast, so a place called Mombasa. So we had, and in those days, it was the telco consortiums who invested in those cables. So that was game changing then. And now the bandwidth is actually exploding because now we have the big techs actually invest in their own cable. So Meta next quarter is launching their to Africa cable. And then Google is doing the Africa one as well. So we're getting like huge submarine connectivity that is growing. Terrestrial network is also growing. And then there are projects like by the World Bank who wants to lay like 100,000 kilometers of fiber in the country and connect us to the region. And then our friend Elon Musk also came last year. So Starlink has launched here. In fact, our data center is the largest hub. We house the teleport for Starlink, which is the largest in Africa. So we're seeing the low orbit connectivity also come into play and very cost effective, especially for hard to reach rural areas as well. And we have very good 5G connectivity in the main sort of urban, peri-urban areas, and that's also growing across the country as well. So, I mean, of course, there's more to be done, but there's already very great connectivity here.
I believe you've got a better connectivity sometimes we do in primary markets like the United States.
Well, certainly better than Hawaii.
Exactly. So from mobile money and education to solar and data center, like you've seen the technology evolve, and particularly in Kenya and the African market. What excites you currently, and what is it that you're more passionate about as it entails to the next wave of innovation?
I'm privileged and blessed to be able to work in different aspects of the value chain because the talent cannot be productive without infrastructure, and infrastructure is useless if the talent cannot use it. So my previous role was I grew the largest tech in the region, a company called Moringa School, where we train tech talents, we train software engineers, data scientists using a bootcamp model. And again, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. My philosophy is to try and partner and find synergies. So for Moringa School, we partnered with Flatiron School out of the US. They're the leading bootcamp provider in the US. So we use their cutting edge curriculum and the quality that we come out with. So a software engineer coming out of Nairobi from the Flatiron curriculum is no different to a software engineer coming out of California or New York or any other part of the US. And then for Moringa School, we go a step further. We also help place this talent. So far we've trained around 15,000 engineers and data analysts. We have a 70% plus job placement rate, of which many of them get absorbed locally. Again, there's been a lot of development here. So for example, Microsoft, AWS, Google, they have all their global product development centers in this market because they're finding the talent. They're also seeing the talent is actually quite affordable. And we also see a place like Kenya to even compete with, for example, Southeast Asia, which typically has been the IT outsourcing destination. But then if you look at the salary increases in those markets, then retaining that kind of talent becomes quite expensive. So there's an opportunity for the talent coming out of Africa to basically become the new BPO destination. So that's really exciting for us. And then, as I mentioned earlier, with the natural resources that we have, we actually have an opportunity to basically export our power to the more developing world and do it via data centers, via infrastructure. So we're seeing that also develop in the good way. And then also we're keeping up with sort of the best practices globally. So for example, we have a data protection regulation here, which is mirrored on the GDPR in Europe. And now we have 8 countries in East Africa was the East African Community. So we're working, again, driven by people like the World Bank and then other DFI to have sort of common regulation to ensure that then there's economies of scale. So not every country, whether it's Rwanda or Uganda or Tanzania or Ethiopia, who needs to put their own infrastructure. We can make a market like Kenya the hub, and then we share the data and the infrastructure with our neighboring countries.
So the primary markets continue to struggle with power, right? I mean, it seems like that you've got 30 gigs of power available pretty much in your neighborhood right now. Do you see a fair amount of activity moving to Kenya in the next 3 to 5 years?
For sure. Microsoft was one of the first ones. Oracle have publicly announced that they're bringing the cloud region here. And then the Googles and AWSs will sure follow suit as well. And then when it comes to AI, because we see like in the developed markets, like places like Ireland, Netherlands, they're like maxed out, right? So data centers are using more than a quarter or a third of the national power grids. So with those limitations, then and then with the connectivity here, with the talent here, so the next 3 to 5 years are looking quite exciting for us.
How much of an allocation would there be right now? I mean, out of the 30 gigs that's available, that's potentially available for the data center space, if you were to put a number to it.
So in fact, today, utility just announced they've hit up one of the peaks in terms of the power consumption. So the national power consumption is something like 0.5 gigawatts. So there's a good 27.5 available to be utilized. Obviously, the power generation investments infrastructure has to catch up. But again, there's huge investment, especially from the Japanese companies like Mitsubishi, Sumitomo, Marubeni. They're all sort of investing in the geothermal power generation here. So that's also developing at the right pace.
Given your experience, we say this sometimes, you learn more through failure than you do with success. So having started your career in finance, seeing on the kind of downward trajectory of the initial internet bubble, how have those lessons kind of translated into your successes on your entrepreneurial journey? Like, what do you think would be some of the lessons you've learned that you've applied to your efforts in all these areas, whether it's through the renewables or the towers or this new hyperscale facility?
I think in order to succeed, I believe in building the right ecosystem. And without the right ecosystem, if you're doing it on your own, you will struggle. So talking about mobile money. So when we launched our product, actually, I was a challenger and I was telling people I have a tough job trying to compete with M-Pesa, which is the biggest mobile money success in the world. And at that time, Orange was owned by France Telecom. So they were pushing their sort of global product for me to launch. And I fought very hard against that because that product was actually inferior to M-Pesa, who was already a success. So I fought to actually do something totally different and instead I partnered with a bank. And as I said, that product was very much ahead of its time. But then there was other learnings from partnerships because you need to make sure that you find the right partner who has the right and the same objectives in mind. So that product that I launched, and unfortunately it did okay, but it wasn't a massive success like M-Pesa is. So that was one learning is, yes, do partner, but make sure that you choose your partner very well. And also make sure that you have other options also on the table so that you're agile enough. So if one marriage or one partnership doesn't work out, try to sort of exit early enough and move on. So that's one example I can give.
Okay. So if you could teleport yourself 5 years from today, what headlines would you love to see about the initiatives that you're involved in or your work just more broadly?
So we have big ambitions for both businesses. So when it comes to the data center, currently we have a facility for around 23 megawatts, of which the first 5 is live. We've already secured another site where we have a design to build like 50 megawatts. So next 3 to 5 years, and given the catch up we're playing with a market like South Africa, is if our company can have successfully built out those facilities and fill them up, especially with the AI workloads. So 50 plus 25. So if I can have deployed and utilized a capacity of at least 75 megawatts, that's what I would call success. And then those infrastructure then being used by local banks who have leapfrogged and using AI in a big way. That's an ambition that I have. And the talent that we're deploying from our school, we're sort of going to be touching like 20,000 students, but we've proved that model. So if we can aim for 200,000 of such talent having been trained and placed into good employment, potentially doing remote jobs for, say, Silicon Valley, that's another target that I have in mind.
Brilliant. I mean, that pretty much solves 2/3 of the challenge that we've got in the sector and creating that level of awareness and opportunities for younger generation to come into our space. And I want to tell the audience over here that you're actually a Nomad Futurist ambassador representing us in Kenya and hopefully potentially in the continent.
How do you talk about eating their own dog food? I mean, you basically do like he's built this full ecosystem where you're talking about like localized talent, has a stake in the outcome, building these communities around internet infrastructure and shedding light on it. The efforts that you're making are incredible, and I think an amazing model that can be exported not to just different areas of Africa, but regions all around the world.
No, as I said, I'm lucky to be working in this, and it's really exciting. And then also great to be chosen as an ambassador for Nomad Futures and the wonderful work that you're doing, and really excited. And I've looked at some of the initial modules for the training, so the introduction into sort of the data center space. And with Moringa School, we have a captive audience. So we're just looking to see now how we can expose that material to the captive audience here and really spread that training. So looking forward to be one of the first to and the guinea pig to really deploy that material in this part of the world.
Brilliant. We've got something coming up every 2 weeks. So hang on tight, folks. There's going to be plenty of content coming your way. Finally, what advice? You have certainly got a very interesting career pathway. I mean, leaving Kenya to go get your electrical engineering degree and getting into finance and then reconnecting everything and staying in the data center sector. What advice would you give a young technologist or an entrepreneur, even somebody that doesn't know that this sector actually exists, as to what the future is? And should it be a career pathway? Should it be something that they should pursue? And if so, how should they go about it?
I think going by how I've got to where I've got to, one of the key things that's helped me is really building and maintaining my network. So never burn your bridges. I mean, as a young technologist or even working in finance, make sure that you are inquisitive and you get to know other people in your organization. And as you also progress your career, never burn your bridges. Always keep links with your previous colleagues. And actually, every single new company or new role I've got into, I've always ended up through my previous connections, and I've always ended up working with my previous colleagues. So I think building sort of your steady career and really building that network and utilizing it is an advice I would give.
I think in general, people think of artificial intelligence and this kind of weird world that we're living in, the Instagram life where everyone is further and further removed from society. It really is human connection that breeds success in all these areas, and making sure that we acknowledge that, I think, is hugely important. So difficult to agree more.
Absolutely. Snehar, so I've met you on the road across multiple continents, and I've always wanted to ask you this. Any personal rituals, nomadic habits, or grounding routines that keep you grounded amidst all of this hype, this growth, and the crazy travel that we do?
I mean, so apart from my school, my other two passions are actually athletics. So coming from where the elite runners come from, so I'm into my marathon runnings. So wherever I'm traveling, I make sure I get a few runs in. So that keeps me grounded. So my first ritual when I wake up is I try and do like, say, 3 to 4 runs a week. And my other passion is actually music. So I'm a performer, so we do some performances for charities. And again, I'm really lucky to be able to perform with my kids as well. So we're a bit of a musical family as well. So that's my meditation as well.
Brilliant. Well, that's great. Well, folks, thank you very much for joining us today. This was Snehar Shah. We are very excited to have him on board as one of our ambassadors and leading the pathways out in Africa, particularly the Kenya market. Snehar, thank you very much for being on the podcast and being a part of this journey with us.
From the center of
we look forward to seeing you soon in our part of the world.
Absolutely. Phil, get your passport ready.
Oh, my passport's ready, man. You know what I'm saying? I'm coming to the Silicon Savannah.
Thank you for joining us on the Nomad Futurist Podcast. Remember, technology, markets, and challenges will continue to evolve, but those who adapt and prepare are the ones who will thrive. Embrace the change, stay curious, and let's build a future worth moving towards. The journey has just begun, and we are glad you are here with us. Visit us anytime at media.nomadfuturist.org to stay connected and be a part of the movement. Until next time, keep exploring.